For the next 75 minutes, we'll be talking about the In Vitro Diagnostic Directive, and in particular, the proposed changes that were made recently by the public consultation in Europe. My name is Darren Walsh. I am an IVD project manager as well as lead auditor for L&E GMed, which is a French notified body based in Paris. To my left, and I have two IVD experts with me today to talk about the future of the directive. Immediately to my left, I have Dr. Judith Andrews from MDCI Aptiv Solutions. Judith has over 20 years of hands-on experience in the FDA regulation of medical devices. She has held positions in product development, manufacturing, quality control, and quality assurance at several companies, including a Fortune 500 company and startup firms. Judith has conducted research in immunology, developed in vitro diagnostic products, and provided technical support for the over-the-counter medical products. She has expertise in the US, EU, and Canadian quality systems, including design control, adverse event reporting, FDA 483s, and warning letters. Judith speaks regularly at meetings and web seminars. She holds a Ph.D. in chemistry from Case Western Reserve University and an MBA from Simmons Graduate School of Management. She is an American Society for Qualified Certified Biomedical Auditor and is Regulatory Affairs Certified. She serves on the board of the New England chapter of the ASQ Biomedical Division. Thank you very much for being here. And I think Judith is going to start off by talking about the Global Harmonization Task Force in particular, and the classification scheme that they propose and what could be the new classification scheme adopted by Europe.
I'm not sure which microphone I'm using here. Let's see if I can make this. It doesn't look like my slides are up there at all. They are not.
No. Should there? There you go.
Yeah, there they are. The introduction is gone, but we'll go ahead. I want to talk just a little bit about the Global Harmonization Task Force risk-based classification and the proposals and how it would impact what you do today and how it's different. Today, on the IVD Directive, there are basically four categories. List A, which is just a list of products. You know what they are. They're clearly marked out, mostly blood bank products. And they fall in List A, and there are certain specifications for putting a List A product on the market in Europe, including notified body review, a design dossier, and in some cases, pre-release by batch. Then there's List B, which is again a list of specific products which fall under that list, and again require notified body review of the quality system in some manner, and also a review of the technical file. And then the third category that requires notified body review is anything that is self-test, pregnancy testing, glucose monitoring, fall under the self-test. And anything else that you put on the market in Europe in the way of an IVD falls under a self-certified classification where you prepare the technical files. They're held by your authorized rep, but there is no requirement for a notified body review of your quality system or your product. There is a risk-based approach that has been proposed by the Global Harmonization Task Force with regulatory controls which will be proportional to the risk associated with the device. This mirrors the way that the Medical Device Directive looks at the classification of medical devices. It does talk about in the Global Harmonization Task Force classification document that regulatory controls should not place an unnecessary burden on the regulators or the manufacturers, and that's part of what we're here today to look at is what are the burdens that might be put on manufacturers and regulators and users with this new risk-based system. The Global Harmonization Task Force criteria is that the risk is based on the indications for use, and these are specified by the manufacturer and reviewed by a notified body where necessary. The technical specifications, the expertise of the user, who's going to use this device and what kind of expertise do they have. The importance of the information. Is this information dealing with high-risk issues to the public, high-risk issues to the individual? And then the impact of the result. What happens if you get a false result, and what is the impact of that on both the individual and public health? And my last slide is the proposed risk levels. And if you look at the risk levels, they talk about both the risk to the individual and the risk to the public. And there are 4 levels being proposed, starting with A as the lowest level, which basically reflects the current self-certify. And then levels B, C, and D would all have some oversight by a notified body, with increasing oversight as the risk level increases. And Class D would pretty much reflect the current List A requirements, although there may be additional products put in based on risk. It would then be up to the individual manufacturer and their notified body to determine which risk level a particular in vitro diagnostic is classified as. And to get more information on that, I'm going to let Darren introduce my colleague Catherine, who will talk a bit about the risk-based approach.
Okay. So our other expert we have today is Dr. Catherine Holzmann. Catherine is the manager for the In Vitro Diagnostics Department at LNE GMed, which is a notified body based in Paris. She graduated with a Doctor of Pharmacy in 1985 and received a Ph.D. from an internship in biology in 1989. Prior to her current position at GMed, she was a marketing manager at Sanofi Diagnostics Pasteur and then a regulatory affairs specialist at Bio-Rad Laboratories. So I think Catherine's going to present her piece of slides.
Good morning. So, in terms of the perspective of the IVD Directive revision, as you know, last year there were the results published of the European Commission public consultation for the IVD Directive revision. According to these different results, which were from manufacturer, from notified body, competent authority, also user, health personnel, there were some questions asked to them, and according to the relative positive rate of the answer, then we can split into categories made in favor of the proposed modification, and then after we will see the other proposal. Of course, the first one is the risk-based classification, as Judy explained you. This risk-based classification in 4 classes, from A to D. D is the highest risk. And with this risk-based classification, the manufacturer has to use 7 rules. With these 7 rules, they have to define if their device is intended to have a high, moderate, or low risk for individual, and the same for public health. It is exactly, if we compare to the the current medical device European directive, it's exactly the same way to make the classification. And in this way, the manufacturer has to make himself his classification for his own IVD medical device. Of course, with this risk-based classification, this leads also to the amendment of the current conformity assessment procedure that we call the assessment route, or the route of conformity, then you have to choose if you would like to make an EC design examination or EC type examination. And for the quality management system, if you have a full quality management system or only focused on the production management system. With these 4 classes, the assessment procedure will evolve. That means for Class A, IVD medical device, the manufacturer will keep his technical documentation on site, but he has also to make this technical documentation, and he has to prepare a quality management system. But this Class A should not be followed by notified body. The other which will be followed by notified body will be Class B, C, and D. What we can see in terms of trends is for Class B and C, it will be mainly a review of the technical documentation on manufacturer side, what is done actually in comparison to Medical Device Directive. And for Class D, it will be a review of the technical documentation on notified body side. So that's why I call the QMS assessment by notified body. The question concerning the batch release of manufactured IVD device in this consultation leads to assure that you still have to have the control of high-risk IVDs by notified bodies. For the CTS, which are the common technical specifications, which are linked to the high-risk IVDs, of course, the common technical specifications are maintained, but also they are extended to some parameters, as for example, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. The question on genetic disease testing is actually the current situation with the IVD directive is that genetic testing are not followed by notified body. It's a self-marking currently. Now with this evolution of the directive, they want to include some genetic testing into the scope of the IVD directive, means would be followed by notified body. When we say genetic testing, it will be genetic testing which will have a medical purpose. It is very important. It's not genetic testing for lifestyle, being, and so on. It's only for medical purpose, and this will be in the scope of the IVD directive. For in-house tests, actually there is an exemption. In-house test means tests made by a health institution and used within this health institution. With this house test, on the current situation, that means this test does not need to be CE mark, actually. They want to keep this exemption for some tests, but they want to review this exemption for in-house tests for high-risk products and also for tests which are commercialized by manufacturer, because they are considering that it's an unfair competition between manufacturers which have to make the CE marking process and in-house testing which are not having to make actually the CE marking process. Then the amendment of the definition putting into service. This definition is very important for the situation we are seeing actually. Actually, there is a huge development of tests which are made, as we call, diagnostic services. That means the test is made on an operator's facility, a special laboratory, which can be inside the European Union or outside of the European Union, but the result is given back to the patient. And technically, this device is not placed on the market. You know, in the IVD Directive, you have the concept of putting into service and place in the market. So because these tests are not placed in the market, they have to be CE mark, but they are considering that in the IVD Directive, in the text, there is a lack of precision. So they want to amend the definition putting into service to add that include also the tests which are not placed on the market. Then they ask also for a specific requirement for the POC, point of care, or near patient IVDs. These tests are conducted by health professionals, but they are not conducted in a clinical laboratory. And for this test, they want exactly the same level in terms of performance characteristic than the test performed in clinical laboratory. The last one is also this new concept of clinical evidence. If we can resume what is clinical evidence, we can say it's both clinical utility and clinical validity. Clinical validity is more simple to explain. It's the performance characteristic of the IVD device, so in terms of sensitivity, specificity, and so on. For clinical validity, the trend is also to ask to the manufacturer to present the negative predictive value or positive predictive value of the device according to the prevalence of the disease. Clinical utility is to demonstrate the utility of the marker which allow the diagnosis. Of course, clinical utility has not been to be demonstrated, for example, for HIV diagnostic or glycemia diagnostic, because these parameters already prove their utility. This is mostly for new parameters, new innovative parameters. But for the moment, there is a kind of statu quo on this because a lot of answers were negative on clinical utility. To make a comparison with the medical device directive, they are also showing some clinical evidence, and their clinical utility can be made by clinical data, but also by bibliographia. Then the next slides are proposals. These are also trends, but which are less stronger than the previous one. The sampling regime for technical documentation review is linked to what I was explaining you before. For a conformity assessment route during the audit, the technical documentation for class B and C, not all the C, but globally for class B and C, will be reviewed on-site, on manufacturer site. That means this will add additional time for the audit on manufacturer site. The assessment route according to Annex 6, which is EC verification, it's not really used in IVD medical device. So the trend is to ask to delete this specific Annex 6 from the IVD Directive. The same position for the Annex 3.6 for self-testing. Because for self-testing, you can choose different assessment routes, the 3.6 and the two other, which are 4 or 5 plus 7. And with the 3.6, you have only a technical documentation review. And they are not on-site audit for the manufacturer. And most of participants think that this annex has some lack of evidence. Then for genetic testing, I was talking about the genetic testing which have a medical purpose, and they ask some clarification about direct and indirect medical purpose. And during this consultation, they were asking to a creation of a MedDef, which is a guide elaborated by manufacturer and notified body to give some clarification about this direct or indirect medical purpose for genetic testing. So the limited exemption for the in-house test I was talking previously will be for rare disease, because we need, of course, this kind of tests for very rare disease, which are not enough interesting for a manufacturer for the commercialization due to the very small market. And also what we call the health threats that we have with SRAS and that we have with H1N1, for example. Also, clarification, the direct-to-consumer test is really interpreted as a self-testing device. Then, they ask for specific requirement for the famous diagnostic service. That means they want that this diagnostic service present very high level of performance characteristic. Also, if this diagnostic service is given back the result directly to the consumer, they were asking some specific instruction and very detailed information for the patient, the consumer. The last, one of the last aspects is restricted conditional CE marking. This restricted conditional CE marking already exists, but it is done in a national, nation by nation. That means for public health stress, a country can decide to give a restricted time, a CE marking, to an IVD medical device for a certain period of time to have very quick access to the market due to the emergency of the situation. Now with this one, they want this restricted CE conditional CE marking will be for all European nations. And then the last one is the inclusion of the companion diagnostic in the classification and assessment route principle. The companion diagnostic, it's an IVD medical device that has been developed and or used with a medicinal product. And so they were asking to define better this term of IVD medical device and to add it in the classification and assessment routes. So just in this slide, I just remind you the different GHTF guides that are existing. The first one is on the classification. You have the link with GHTF organization. So it was made by the study group 1 and give the general classification in 4 risk categories. The second one is on the conformity assessment. So that's an overview of the available conformity assessment element that you need, like a quality management system, post-market surveillance, the STED, which is a summary of technical documentation, declaration of conformity and registration. And then the last one is clinical evidence. This document actually is a working draft, so you cannot find it on the GHTF website, and they are still, for the moment, working on it. And just slight information on the 5 funding members of the GHTF, because you may have heard that the GHTF agreed to stop these activities on the current form they are working actually, but they are going to create a forum composed by only a representative of regulatory body. That means manufacturer will not be anymore in this forum. And then I give you the link with the statement of the future of this GHTF group. Thank you.
Okay. Hello? Thank you, Catherine. So in your presentation, ladies, you were talking about the risk-based approach being the major, I guess, the major topic of discussion. How does the current regulation in terms of classification, let's start off, what are the problems with the current classification system?
Well, I'm not sure a lot of manufacturers would say there's a great deal of problem with the current classification system as far as they're concerned, because an awful lot of the IVDs that they make are self-certified. There is a concern with the current classification in terms of the risk of the products and oversight by a regulatory body for most of these devices. Both the US and Canada, for example, and Australia, who have basically adopted this risk-based approach out of Global Harmonization Task Force, have much more oversight, regulatory oversight of IVDs. So from that standpoint, I think it's mostly a matter of the concern for public health that is driving this, rather than where the manufacturers stand.
Okay, Catherine, do you want to have anything to add to that?
Just a comment, yes. I will say that the current classification is based on Annex 2, and it's quite easy and simple, actually, to classify the IVD medical device because it's a positive list. The evolution is that we will have the same kind of making classification like medical device, so we are following the evolution of medical device directive, and with the 7 rules, and then the manufacturer has to settle the classification by his own. It will be more complicated for manufacturer, and to have the advice if the classification is correct or not, they should ask to their competent authority. So it will be more complicated for them. And that's true what Judy was saying, that TGA in Australia already has present is a new IVD regulation. And in this, they are presenting 4 classes. They're calling one from 2 to 4, and this classification is A to D. And they are giving some example of the parameters which they are feeling these parameters are belonging to which class. So it can be interesting for you to see what TGA has made with this classification, but for sure it will be more complicated for a manufacturer. And maybe notified body too, but...
So if this GHTF model is adopted, how will that affect the conformity assessment procedures in particular? The way the manufacturer chooses which route they want to take. You, Catherine, you were talking about the deleting Annex 6 and 3.6. What impact does that have on the manufacturers?
For self-testing, if they decide to delete the Annex 3.6 for self-testing, it will impact very much the manufacturer, because usually for self-testing, they are usually mixed manufacturer. They are making some medical device and just 1 or 2 IVD self-testing for pregnancy or ovulation, for example. And they have not a lot of practice of the IVD directive. And with this assessment route, they are not audited by notified body. So we don't know exactly which quality system they have put in place. And if they are deleting this Annex 3.6, they will be audited by notified body, and then the assessment of the quality management system will be part of the certification.
Judy, do you see the need to amend them? Or?
Yeah, well, I think that the deletion, it puts the self-test in the same general classification scheme as the rest of the IVDs, and it will be based on risk. For example, glucose monitoring will fall in a higher risk category than pregnancy or ovulation fertility testing IVDs, so that the tests and the oversight by a notified body will be more commensurate with the risk that the test poses to both the individual and the public. I think one of the other issues is an impact on manufacturers is that most of the IVDs that you now self-certify to Europe are probably going to fall in Class B. Class A is pretty much reserved for things like instruments and sample collection devices and a few other very simple in vitro diagnostics. But things like hormone testing, vitamin testing, most of the small molecules will now fall in Class B, which does require a pre-assessment, some pre-assessment of the quality system by whatever annex you choose before something is placed on the market in Europe.
Okay. So in terms of, so a manufacturer, for example, has a product. They're trying to determine the class of the product, and it's termed borderline. A borderline product, for example, what would be, should there be additional requirements for borderline processes? Who should be involved in determining whether or not the product is in this class or this class? Should it be ultimately the manufacturer? Should the notified body take a role in that, or should it be the competent authority? Should there be any added requirements for that? What do you think, Catherine?
Borderline device, first more, it's what is important is for the Article 1 of the IVD Directive to be sure that you are in the scope and in the definition of the IVD Directive. With the risk-based classification, that this product will be handled as another IVD medical device.
From my perspective, and I've seen it happen already in IVDs, that there really needs to be some sort of central authority that makes those decisions consistently. I have seen 2 notified bodies come in and classify the same device, one as List A and the other as self-certify. And so depending on how they view the device, you don't want to be shopping for notified bodies based on whether or not they're going to give you a break on classification. Mm-hmm. I know with the medical devices, there is a document that helps you classify some of the borderline issues, and I think that's going to be very critical that some sort of directive come out for things that fall in a borderline area. For example, they talk about things that measure, and this was the case that we looked at before, HIV status. Where does that fall? Is that HIV testing for blood banks is clearly Class D, but what about something like CD4, which is testing for IVD status? Is that a Class B or is that a Class C? And I think those kinds of things need to be determined by some guidance document that's universal and not determined by which notified body you happen to choose. And I think that's going to be an issue that needs to be resolved as this, if this risk-based system is put in place.
Sure. And if this risk-based system is put in place, but doesn't currently the regulation require that if a product falls in 2 categories, you take the stricter category? So does this approach, if a product falls, for example, self-testing HIV product, for example, would still be a List A product even though it's self-testing. So wouldn't you still take this most stringent category of products?
Yeah, that's going to be a pretty straightforward issue. But when you start getting down to an analyte by analyte basis, what does this analyte test for? Is it a low public health risk? Is it a moderate public health risk? And I think it's going to be, the issues are going to be not so much with the known analytes or infectious diseases, but as new analytes come along, particularly markers, where do you put those in the category? I think the same thing holds true for determining where companion diagnostics are going to fit in this scheme. The U.S. is obviously grappling with this as well, but how do you determine the risks of a companion diagnostic in terms of prescribing a particular treatment or dose of a drug?
Okay. Catherine, you were mentioning before about the in-house testing. What requirements or additional requirements do you think would be necessary for in-house tests, if any?
For the in-house test, You mean the test?
They still, right, they still should fulfill the essential requirements, obviously, but for in-house testing, should there be more stringent rules based on the product itself? If it's in-house, it doesn't obviously leave outside the testing facility by the clinical laboratory, for example, but should there be additional rules based on maybe what it's testing or things like this?
Yes, but for example, actually the current situation is for in-house testing. There is not specific requirement because they are not in the IVD scope.
Mm-hmm.
So if the exemption is limited for some rare disease, but if the other in-house tests are out of this exemption, of course, there will be some performance characteristic which will be asked to be proved by the manufacturer according to the intended use declared by the manufacturer.
Sure. And should these performance tests, for example, Judy, do you think the in-house test should require common technical specifications if the product is high risk? Should they conform to those even if they're in-house?
I think and again, this is something that lots of regulatory agencies are grappling with right now, is what is in-house testing and what is required. And I certainly think that if common technical specifications exist for the product, then in-house testing ought to comply as well. But I also noticed the comment in the questions asked and some of the proposals is that if a test is commonly available through commercial manufacturers, that in-house testing would be limited because it presents an advantage in competition. And therefore, if there are common technical specifications, that's probably because the product is in general commercial use. So it's going to be a hard thing to regulate, just like the issue of regulating laboratories that you send out samples for and test houses that then send you back information. That's going to be another area which is going to be very difficult to regulate, particularly if those test houses are outside of Europe.
Sure. Okay. And I think not recently, but somewhat recently, a lot of IVD manufacturers are developing these point-of-care or near-patient tests, and they'd like to know if there's any specific requirements for a point-of-care test or a near-patient test on top of what's already expected by the directive. I don't know if you'd like to add on that, Catherine? Or?
They want exactly the same, what we call a clinical validity level as for a clinical laboratory test. Even if this point of care or near patient test is made by health professional, it is not made in a clinical laboratory. So they will ask exactly the same performance requirement in terms of sensitivity and or specificity, depending on the intended use of the test.
Okay.
So it would be the same level.
That's what the current recommendation is, that it will follow the same. I had one question, and maybe Catherine, you can answer my question, and that is, I did not see anything in any of the tests, any of the questions, or anything in any of the proposals, which is something which is very prominent in the medical device directive, and that is usability testing. And I would certainly think that near patient IVDs would be subject to some sort of usability requirement by the notified body to ensure that a non-professional could use them.
Usability, you know, there is a special harmonized standard for usability. So now the manufacturers are taking this new standard and implementing it in the design input. And you're right, it's very important for this kind of test to have correct usability process review for the device. It's very linked with the risk analysis process too.
Sure.
But it's very important to take now in account the usability.
Okay. In terms of clinical evaluation or clinical evidence, should there be an explicit requirement more than what's done by the performance evaluation?
Yes, this working draft for the moment, it's a draft, so they are just talking a lot about this. We can make a comparison with still the medical device directive to see the trend. And for medical device directive, in the directive they have a specific annex, which is the Annex 10 in the Directive 9342 CE for medical device. And the trend is to ask also to have a specific annex in the text of the IVD Directive for clinical evidence. But clinical evidence is the addition of clinical utility and clinical validity. So clinical validity will be the same performance characteristic manufacturers are used to present. Maybe they will add some negative or predictive or positive predictive value. That's in discussion. And for clinical utility, lots of answers were very negative. And maybe for some innovative parameters, maybe some clinical utility with bibliography literatures, maybe. But for the moment, it's not so well represented as it is for a medical device.
Sure.
Yeah. I think the issue of clinical utility is going to be one of those areas where there's a lot of pushback from the manufacturer. And I did hear one comment when I was reading through the responses that clinical utility is really the realm of the medical industry, whether or not a particular assay, and I think in this case we're going to be seeing a lot of this with all of the new markers that are coming out, and whether a particular marker is of use in terms of its diagnostic benefit is going to be determined by the medical community and its acceptance or not of an assay. And I think requiring manufacturers to demonstrate clinical utility is going to be something that's going to be very hard to get your hands around for new analytes coming out. I mean, obviously, the clinical utility of the old standards, thyroid testing, infectious disease testing, there's no issue. But as more and more test revolves around markers of various diseases or markers that point to certain treatment regimens, demonstrating the clinical utility of this may become very expensive if it's rigorously invoked by the notified body. And again, it's another area where I can see great variability between notified bodies, and some consistency is going to have to be imposed by, again, some MedDev guidance or something else on what exactly clinical utility is, if that's indeed the direction that is eventually taken.
Okay.
And that's why for clinical utility, actually, there is a very large discussion, but because they don't want to force the manufacturer to do this clinical utility, because they are afraid that this might decrease the innovation of new markers. Because if it's too complicated, then the innovation will decrease due to this new requirement in terms of clinical utility. So for the moment, they are really thinking about that.
Okay. Okay. And this notion of conditional CE marking in the case of a very rare disease, for example, or any potential threat of a pandemic to a population, manufacturers would like to probably know if they need to meet the same requirements, or again, depending on what it's testing, how do they get their product on the market as quick as possible to prevent something to spread, for example, if the regulation is kind of holding them back,
Well, if you read the comments, it's actually the competent authorities of the individual countries in Europe that are pushing back against this and are still in favor of the country-by-country release of emergency testing particularly for infectious diseases during a pandemic, the SARS, and other viruses that might crop up. And Europe is in a unique disadvantage in this respect. I mean, in the U.S., it's one agency that would make those decisions and expedite the approval of a diagnostic for something which is involved in an emergency use situation. Canada, Australia, Europe is unique in that, and there is a lot of pushback from the individual competent authorities that that is their jurisdiction, and they would not be open, or not terribly open, to something which would go through a notified body or some competent authority board, and the exact, as far as I can see so far, the exact mechanism and who would make those decisions isn't clearly laid out.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and for this conditional CE marking, actually that the competent authority which are responsible for, and I mean the notified body, do not want to take this responsibility. They still want this responsibility to be kept by a competent authority, but they want maybe a creation of a competent authority committee to make a mutual decision of this kind of CE mark for European market.
Okay. And the last question, speaking of the rare disease, for example, Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, which is basically the human form of the mad cow disease, right?
Mm-hmm.
Based on this extreme rarity of the disease, there's been a lot of push by the community to add this to the List A products. What is your thought on that?
There was a slight modification on the IVD Directive in 2009 to allow to include new parameters, because before, as the IVD Directive text was made, it was impossible to add a new parameter, even if it was considered as a high-risk IVD device. Then in 2009, they make a revision of a few articles in the IVD directives, and in this article, they say that they can add a new parameters for the Annex 2, which is actually the classification list. And so Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease was considered as very high risk in some countries in Europe and mainly in UK. And that was due to this kind of lobbying from blood tenders in UK that they decide to include the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. But the current situation is that some blood screening bank have found a mean to prevent this disease transmission by, deleukocytation, the white cells, and then they deleukocyte the blood bag, and this should prevent this disease. So hopefully now the IVD Directive has the possibility to add new markers in this Annex 2, which was not possible before.
Mm-hmm.
All this goes away, of course, in a risk-based system. Creutzfeldt-Jakob would obviously fall clearly in Class A because it's a blood screening question of transmission through blood transfusion. So once you get to a risk-based determination of classification, the list is no longer necessary. But again, it makes it more work on the part of the manufacturer and the notified body to make sure that they are clear on what classification actually applies to a particular analyte.
Okay. Okay, great. Now I'd like to invite anybody in the audience who has a particular question for our two experts here. If you have a question, please just go to the microphone, state your name, the company you work for, and your question, please, for our panelists.
My name is Jennifer Smith of Biopharm Insight, and I have a question for Dr. Holzmann. Just the suggestion that Dr. Andrews mentioned on borderline tests or companion diagnostics. I'm just wondering if that is something that that is being worked on in the sense of as part of the draft, something that's up for discussion, and just kind of any sort of more, I guess, some more definitive timelines that you can offer.
Sorry, explain. Could you repeat precisely your question? It's on companion diagnostics?
No. What the where Dr. Andrews had mentioned about some type of directive being issued would be helpful on companion diagnostics as well as on borderline tests, and I was wondering if that is something that is up for discussion, and also just to get some better ideas of more definitive timelines on the directive.
So companion diagnostic will be included in the IVD directive, and actually that's the trend, but they will ask for a specific requirement in terms of performance characteristic at the current IVD medical device.
I did see one timeline mentioned in the public comment of an implementation time of 5 years. It seems awfully long, but that was what was requested by a lot of manufacturers, but that's not yet been determined.
Okay.
In the U.S., there's a big distinction between doctors' offices and standard labs with CLIA waivers and all of that. Is there any analogy or analogous approval for the EU on using diagnostics in doctors' offices, or are they just considered near patient care tests?
So doctor offices means they are considered as using a point of care test. Yes. I can talk about France. There are some few tests which are used for streptococcus. Some few tests can be used by a doctor test, and then they are considered as a point of care test.
Yeah, I think there's more of a country-by-country oversight of what goes on in doctors' offices and clinics than there is in the U.S., although there is some state-by-state oversight if you look at what goes on in California. But member states have a lot more control over what goes on and what can and can't be done in the doctor's office than is stated in the directive.
Hi, Brian DeCaro from Medco. First, let me ask a clarifying question before I ask my question. So D is the lowest risk group, is that correct?
No, the highest.
So A is, that's what I thought. So
Right.
A is the lowest risk group.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay. So what for Class B devices, the second lowest risk group, what oversight is there or enforcement is there that the manufacturer doesn't make a self-assessment of reclassifying themselves as a Class A device and then not needing to actually make any regulatory applications for that device? Can you talk a little bit about that type of oversight if these rules go into effect?
I think it will be the more difficult to know if the device is Class A or B.
Mm-hmm.
You have certain number of rules which are stating if you are not in agreement with this rule, then you can be considered as Class A. The thing is, when the manufacturer will send the registration form to a competent authority, he has to send for any kind of class. So if his device is wrongly classified, then like Class A, because the notified body would not be informed of this device, then the competent authority should answer to the manufacturer that the classification is wrong, and then he has to go through a notified body.
There is a process whereby you must have an authorized rep who agrees with your classification and is willing to submit it to the competent authority. And right now, and that's another question I have, right now IVDs must be submitted to each and every competent authority within the EU. Medical devices only need to be submitted to one and to be useful everywhere. Is that considering anything that's being changed? I didn't see that in the
Now
directive.
there is a big change. You have the AdvaMed, which is a database for commercialization, for authorization of commercialization. Because when the manufacturer has issued his declaration of conformity for a Class A or self-marking, then he was before sending to the country where he was intending to commercialize his product the EU registration form. And now you have the European database. That means all European competent authority will know at the same time the information about this device. So maybe the authorized representative, maybe in France, will not have answer from France, but he can have answer from other competent authority about his classification. The database is ongoing since May this year, so it's working now.
So thank you. That was an interesting clarification because I'd like to maybe have some more information since all the member states are supposed to be following the same harmonized rules once they join the union. Why are we now hearing that different competent authorities are not following the same rules? And that's a huge issue. So that seems in violation of the policy.
Yes, you're right.
Right. So when and will that change? And
AdvaMed is the name of the database. It's EUDAMED, and it's working since May 2011. So this year, so manufacturers should register it through this database now, or their authorized representative in Europe. Okay.
But previously we also heard the discussion regarding the competent authorities pushing back on emergency things. Shouldn't those requirements also be harmonized across all the member states? Why should each individual competent authority have a different program for
They should
accepting
have. They
that?
should have.
Okay,
They
so-
have work. They have meeting, the work together, and they should have. Yes.
So
Yeah.
when does that get fixed?
Just a comment also from not only the IVD directive, but also the medical device directive. And it is a constant tension between, and this is true in many areas in the European Union, a constant tension between the harmonization of the EU and the jurisdiction and authority of the individual member states. And you see things going up and down where various countries now require additional information. For example, in the medical device area, if you are using something that has material of bovine or ovine origin, some countries are requiring additional information above and beyond, and France is one of them, above and beyond what is required by the directive. So it's a constant tension. And I don't see it going away anytime soon.
And I will have just a special comment for companion diagnosis. And I was before. For companion diagnosis, that you have to keep in mind that also there is an agency which is called EMA, which is European Medical Agency. And for this kind of companion diagnostic, that might be an implication of the EMA also.
Okay. Well, if nobody has any other questions, if you think of any, please feel free to come up and talk to these two outside or come up here. I think that will conclude our discussion for today. If you see us, just holler at us, let us know what you're thinking, or if you have any questions, just ask them. They're here to help. Thank you all very much for listening to us. Enjoy the rest of your time here at AdvaMed 2011. Thank you.